I put $340,000 into my husband's restaurant. Every single cent of it came from me. From the savings account I'd been building since I was 22. From the inheritance my grandmother left me. From the 2 years I spent working double shifts at the hospital while he was still figuring out his vision. I want you to understand that before anything else. Because what happened next makes no sense unless you know that number. $340,000. My money. My future. My name on the wire transfers. His name on the restaurant. We met when I was 26. I was a registered nurse working nights at a trauma center in Philadelphia, and he walked into my life the way charming men always do, at the wrong moment saying exactly the right thing. He was smart, ambitious, the kind of man who talked about his dreams like they were already real. He wanted to open a farm-to-table restaurant in downtown Philadelphia. Something intimate and high-end. The kind of place that got written up in food magazines and had a 3-month waitlist. He had the taste, the concept, the connections. What he didn't have was capital. I had capital. I also had something worse. I was in love with him. We got married when I was 28. Small ceremony, just family and close friends. His mother flew in from Atlanta and spent the entire rehearsal dinner telling my sister-in-law how my centerpieces were a little plain. I smiled through it. My husband squeezed my hand under the table and whispered that she was just nervous. I believed him. The restaurant planning started almost immediately after the honeymoon. He had a name. Holloway's, using his family name, not mine, which I didn't think much of at the time. He had a location scouted in Rittenhouse Square, a space that had been a jazz club in the 1970s and still had these gorgeous exposed brick walls and original hardwood floors. He had a chef he'd been in conversation with, a woman named Iris who had done time under a Michelin-starred kitchen in New York and wanted to move back home. What he had on paper was perfect. What he needed was my $340,000. We sat at our kitchen table one Sunday morning and he walked me through the business plan. It was thorough. He had projected costs, revenue models, a timeline to profitability. He was persuasive in the way that only people who have really thought about something can be persuasive. I asked questions. He had answers. I asked harder questions. He had better answers. I signed the paperwork. I transferred the money in 2 installments, $190,000 first, then $150,000 4 months later when the build-out ran over budget. He said construction always ran over. I believed him. I believed him about a lot of things. For the next year and a half, I watched Holloway's come to life. I visited the space on my days off and stood in the middle of the half-finished dining room while workers tiled the kitchen and installed the bar. I tasted menu items with Iris in her home kitchen, sitting on bar stools while she explained flavor profiles and seasonal sourcing. I helped my husband pick the wine list, or I thought I did. Looking back, he mostly nodded at my suggestions and then did whatever he wanted anyway. His mother visited twice during the build-out. Both times she arrived unannounced, and both times she had opinions about everything. The lighting was too warm, the tables were too close together, the logo font was wrong. My husband listened to her with the kind of patience he rarely offered me. I told myself it was just how their family was. I told myself it didn't mean anything. What I noticed, if I'm honest with myself now, was that I was never quite included in the conversations that mattered. When the contractor needed decisions, my husband called his mother. When Iris had concerns about the kitchen equipment, my husband called his mother. There was a dinner with the real estate agent, a meeting with the accountant, a tasting event for potential investors, none of which I attended. My husband always had an explanation. You were working. You said you were tired. I didn't think you'd want to sit through all that. I didn't push back. I was working. I was tired. I'd spent 18 months funding a dream that I had somehow convinced myself was ours. The opening date was set for a Saturday in October. I found out about it the way you find out about things when you're not really part of something. I saw it on Instagram. His restaurant's Instagram account, which his sister-in-law managed, posted a beautifully designed graphic. Grand opening. October 14th. Reservations now open. I was sitting in the break room at work when I saw it. I remember the exact feeling, not quite hurt, not quite angry. Just a strange stillness, like the moment before you realize something has gone seriously wrong. I texted him. When were you going to tell me the date was set? He called me on my lunch break. He was breezy about it, almost confused by my question. He said the date had been in flux and they'd just confirmed it that morning. He said he would have told me that evening. He said his sister-in-law had posted early because she got excited. I asked about my ticket. He paused. I asked again, where should I be? What time? What should I wear for the opening? There was a silence that lasted maybe 4 seconds. In retrospect, those 4 seconds were the most honest thing he said to me in the entire conversation. He told me the opening night was a private event, just close family and key people from the industry. He said I would understand. It was professional, not personal. He said there would be a public opening the following week, and I could come then. I asked him if he was serious. He said he knew it seemed strange, but his mother had organized the guest list, and she wanted to keep it intimate. He said his mother felt that too many people in the space would be overwhelming. He said he would make it up to me. I put my phone down and finished my lunch. I went back to work. I put an IV line in a 63-year-old man having a cardiac event, and I talked him through his breathing, and I didn't think about the restaurant or my husband or his mother or the $340,000 until my shift ended at 11 o'clock that night. Then I sat in my car in the parking garage and I thought about all of it. October 14th came. My husband got dressed in a new suit I hadn't seen before and left our apartment at 4 in the afternoon. He kissed me on the cheek and told me he'd be back late. He told me not to wait up. I didn't wait up. I watched 3 hours of television and went to bed at 9. That was the loneliest night I can remember. He came home at 1 in the morning, smelling like wine and someone else's perfume. I wasn't certain then. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was already primed to be suspicious and my brain was making connections that weren't real. But I filed it away, the way you file things away when you're not ready to look at them yet. The following week was the public opening. I went. I sat at a two-top near the window with my sister-in-law, who had driven down from New York and was the only person who seemed to genuinely think I should be there. The food was extraordinary. Iris had done something special, and the room was beautiful. Everything I had imagined when I stood in that half-finished space 18 months before. My husband worked the room. He shook hands and accepted compliments and showed the chef off to food critics, and I watched him from across the restaurant like I was watching someone I used to know. He stopped at my table twice. Both times he introduced me to the people he was with as my wife, not by name, just my wife, the way you'd reference a piece of furniture. His mother was there. She looked at me once, across the room, and turned away without speaking. 3 weeks after the opening, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. But something made me pick up. It was a woman. She was crying, but not in the way people cry when they're sad. In the way people cry when they're sad. In the way people cry when they've run out of other options. She told me her name was Petra. She told me she'd been seeing my husband for 14 months. She told me she was pregnant. I sat down on the floor of my kitchen. I don't remember deciding to sit down. I was just suddenly on the floor, with the cold tile under me, and the phone pressed to my ear, listening to a woman I'd never met tell me that my husband had been lying to me for over a year. I asked her how she knew about me. She said he'd told her we were separated. She said she believed him until she found a photo on his phone. A photo of us at a friend's wedding 4 months ago, standing together with my head on his shoulder, the way you stand with someone you were very much not separated from. She said she didn't know I'd funded the restaurant. I hadn't known she existed. We were both working with incomplete information, and the only person who had the full picture was my husband. I thanked her for calling. I meant it. I still mean it. After I hung up, I didn't cry. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, and I thought very carefully about what I knew and what I needed to do. I thought about the $340,000 and whose name was on what, and what my legal options were. I thought about the mortgage on our apartment, which was in my name, by the way, because his credit wasn't strong enough when we bought it. I thought about the car he drove, which was also in my name. I called my cousin Marcus, who was an attorney, not a divorce attorney, a business attorney, which turned out to be exactly what I needed. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting, and when I finished, there was a brief silence, and then he said, "Okay, don't move any money. Don't say anything to your husband. I need to look at the restaurant documents." It turned out there was quite a bit to look at. Marcus called me back 48 hours later. He walked me through it carefully, in the way he always explains things, methodically, without drama, just fact after fact. Because my investment had been structured as a loan rather than an equity stake, something I had not fully understood when I signed the original documents. I had legal standing to call the debt. The restaurant had used my money to secure a line of credit with the bank, and that line of credit had terms attached to it. Terms that my husband had, in 2 specific instances, violated. He needs your signature on something he filed 6 months ago, Marcus said, and your signature on it isn't yours. I asked him to say that again. He said it again. My husband had forged my signature on a financial document related to the restaurant's line of credit. He had needed my authorization as a co-borrower, and he had simply signed for me. I kept my voice very even. I asked Marcus what my options were. He said, every single one of them. My husband came home that evening to find me sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee. He seemed surprised. I was usually asleep by the time he got back from the restaurant these days. He asked if everything was okay. I said everything was fine. I asked about his day. He talked about the restaurant for 11 minutes, I counted, without once asking about mine. Then he sat down across from me and said he needed to talk to me about something. He had the look of a man preparing to be reasonable about an unreasonable request. I recognized that look. I'd seen it when he'd asked for the second installment of money. He said the restaurant was in a difficult period. The first few months were always hard, he said. Everyone knew that. He said there were some bills that needed to be handled, vendor invoices that were past due, and the line of credit was at its limit. He said he needed me to wire $45,000 by the end of the week. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I smiled. He saw the smile and something flickered behind his eyes. Not quite worry, but the beginning of it. I told him the money he was asking about was for close family. I told him he should ask them. He stared at me. He said, "What does that mean?" I told him I thought he knew exactly what it meant. I told him I'd spoken to Petra. The color left his face in stages, like water draining. I told him I'd also spoken to Marcus. I told him I knew about the signature. I told him I knew about the line of credit and what would happen when the bank was informed about the forged authorization. He started to speak. I stood up, which stopped him. I told him I'd be staying with my sister-in-law for the next few weeks while he found somewhere else to go. I told him the apartment, which, as he knew, was in my name, would not be available to him past the end of the month. I told him his mother, who had been using the guest room since the restaurant opened, was welcome to find alternate arrangements as well. Then I picked up my coffee, rinsed the mug, set it in the drying rack, and went to the bedroom to pack a bag. He followed me. He talked the entire time I was packing. Apologies, explanations, promises, accusations, back to apologies. He said Petra meant nothing. He said he'd been under enormous pressure. He said I didn't understand what it was like to build something from nothing. I found that last one almost funny, given the circumstances. I zipped my bag. I looked at him. I said, "You built it from $340,000 of my money. I understand exactly what that's like." I walked out. His mother was in the hallway when I came out of the bedroom. She had clearly been listening. She had a look on her face that I can only describe as recalculation, like someone rapidly revising a position they'd held with complete confidence 5 minutes ago. She said she hoped I wasn't going to do anything rash. I told her son had forged my signature on a federal financial document. I told her the apartment she was currently sleeping in belonged to me. I told her I'd left a number on the kitchen counter. It was Marcus's number. And that any further conversations about the restaurant, the money, or the living arrangements should go through him. Then I walked past her, out the front door, and down to the street, where I sat in my car for a while before I drove to my sister-in-law's apartment in Fishtown. She'd made up the couch with clean sheets, and there was a bottle of wine open on the counter. She didn't ask me to explain anything. She just handed me a glass and we sat there quietly for a while, and I cried a little. Not from sadness exactly, but from the specific exhaustion of having finally stopped carrying something very heavy. The next few months were not simple. Nothing about this kind of thing is simple. There were attorneys and documents and conversations I never wanted to have. Marcus was meticulous. He is always meticulous. And when he was done, the restaurant's debt structure had been untangled and my loan had been formally reinstated with interest. The bank was informed of the signature irregularity through the appropriate channels. My husband retained his own attorney who was notably less meticulous than Marcus. Petra had her baby, a boy. I don't know what my husband's relationship with his son looks like now. That's not my story to tell. What I can tell you is this: the apartment sold in the spring. My name was the only one on the deed, and the proceeds went entirely to me. The car sold in February. Also my name. I moved into a place of my own in March, smaller, quieter, and more mine than anything I'd lived in for the past 6 years. Holloway's closed 8 months after it opened. I heard about it from my sister-in-law, who had seen a post on the restaurant's Instagram. The post was brief and vague, something about unforeseen circumstances and gratitude for the community's support. Iris had already left by then. She'd taken a position at a restaurant in DC. I was glad for her. She was never the problem. My husband's mother called me once, about 4 months after everything fell apart. I didn't pick up. She left a voicemail that was 3 minutes long and consisted primarily of her explaining to me in a measured voice why I had handled things incorrectly. I listened to it once, deleted it, and made myself a cup of tea. I'm 32 now. I'm still a nurse, nights, still. Though I've moved to a different hospital. I have a good apartment and a good therapist and a savings account that I'm building back up, more slowly this time but with considerably more clarity about where it's going. People ask me sometimes if I regret the money. $340,000 is not a small number. It's not something you replace in a year or two. But here's what I know. I watched a man build something beautiful with my resources and then close the door to me. I watched his mother tell me, with her silence and her turned back, that I didn't belong there. And I think about that night in October, the opening night when I sat alone in my apartment watching television while my investment threw a party I wasn't invited to. I think about sitting on my kitchen floor with the phone in my hand and making the decision, right there on that cold tile, that I was not going to fall apart. That I was going to stand up and make coffee and think clearly and be very, very careful about what came next. I stood up. I made the coffee. I was careful. And when he called me 6 weeks later, from a number I didn't recognize because I'd already blocked his, asking if there was any chance we could talk, just work something out, I let it go to voicemail. Then I went to work. I had a 12-hour shift. I took care of people who were genuinely fighting for something. And at the end of it, I drove home to my apartment, to my quiet, and I slept very well. Some investments don't pay off the way you planned. But some of them teach you something worth more than the money. What I learned on that kitchen floor and in the months that followed is that I know how to stand up. I know how to think clearly when everything around me is a mess. I know how to protect myself when someone I loved couldn't be trusted to do it for me. That, I've decided, is more than enough to build from. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since all of this happened. Not in any mystical sense. I'm too practical for that and frankly too tired. But in the plain, observable way that choices accumulate into consequences, the way a crack in a foundation doesn't announce itself until the whole wall shifts. My husband made choices. Small ones at first, the kind that are easy to excuse, not telling me about the opening date, letting his mother run the guest list, not pushing back when I was left out of meetings that concerned my own money. Each of those choices was a decision about who I was to him, not a partner, not a co-builder, someone to draw from. And the thing about drawing from a person repeatedly without refilling anything is that eventually you find out what they're actually made of. What I was made of surprised even me. I think about Petra calling me and how I could have fallen apart right there on that kitchen floor and no one would have blamed me. $340,000, 14 months of lies. A pregnancy that wasn't mine to carry but was somehow mine to absorb. There was every reason to go to pieces. Instead, I stood up, made coffee, and called Marcus. I don't say that to make myself sound strong. I say it because I genuinely didn't know I could do that until the moment required it of me. That's what I've come to understand about resilience. It doesn't show up in the easy moments. It shows up on cold tile floors when you have no good options and you have to choose the least bad one and execute it clearly. The people who manage to do that aren't special. They've just decided somewhere along the way that clarity matters more than comfort. That knowing the truth, even when the truth is expensive, is better than staying warm in a lie. The ethical part of this is something I sit with too. Because I was not entirely without fault. I gave money to someone I loved, without insisting on structures that protected me. I saw the signs, the exclusions, the explanations, the 4-second silence on the phone, and I filed them away instead of acting on them. There's a version of me that could have had this conversation 6 months earlier and lost considerably less. I don't blame myself for loving him, but I do hold myself accountable for the ways I chose not to see. That accountability is important. Not as self-punishment, I've had enough of that, but as information. Because the same intelligence that helped me untangle the aftermath could have served me earlier if I'd been willing to use it on something that scared me. What I want for anyone listening to this is just that. Use your intelligence on the things that scare you. Don't file away the 4-second silences. Don't tell yourself you're imagining things when your body already knows. The mind is a remarkable instrument, but it only works as well as you're willing to let it. Holloway's is closed now. The lease was reassigned. Iris is cooking somewhere in DC, and from what I understand, doing beautifully. My apartment is quiet and entirely mine. My savings account is growing. I'm 32. I have a long time to build things. And this time, I'll know exactly whose name is on the paperwork.